Hi creatives, and welcome back to the series on how to create a brand identity from scratch. If you missed part 1 and 2, where we looked at everything that happens before you start a project and also how to conduct really good brand discovery meetings, I'll make sure to add those in the description so you can go check them out first if you like. Today I'm going to take you through how to conduct really good brand research and create mood boards. So we're going to take it from how to find the information that we need, put together research reports, create mood boards, and then how to present all of this to our clients. To make it a little bit easier to follow along, I thought we would design this for a fictional brand. So I decided that we're going to create this for an urban garden called Rootful. Their goal is to have a space for people who live in a city to come and meet and build community, to have a way for them to eat more locally produced vegetables, but also to learn about our food production and how to be more sustainable overall. We're actually, as a family right now, trying to grow all of our own vegetables ourselves, so this will be a really fun exercise for me as well and a way to learn a little bit more about urban gardens. Last time in the discovery meeting, we talked to our clients about their customers, their vision, and other brands that they feel inspired by. Today, our job is to look at trends and opportunities in this market and see what we can use when we create the brand ourselves. The first step is to conduct the brand research, and I like to break this up into a couple different steps. First, I like to look into similar companies, both competitors that my clients have mentioned, but also companies that I think could be a competitor that maybe they missed. First, I visit their website and I look for a few different things. I like to see how they use design to convey information, like for example what photography they use, how they use layout and colors, and maybe if they use illustrations or infographics, for example. I also look at their logo. I take screenshots of everything and I add them to Milanote, so I have a place to collect all of my research. You can also use the Milanote extension to grab the images directly and put them into a board. The next thing I look for on the websites is messaging. How do they pitch their business? How is the tone? Is it friendly and casual or formal and to the point, for example? This tells us both what information that they think their customers care about, but also how they like to be spoken to. If a lot of competitors are using the same approach, we need to ask ourselves if it's because it's really working or maybe because people are a little bit worried to step away from the norm. So in some cases, it could be an industry where you can disrupt and you can come up with a completely different approach, and that can work great. But in some industries, let's say for example you're a lawyer, you might not want to have a super happy, fun-go-lucky tone. Or if you're an ice cream shop, you might not want to be super duper serious. So sometimes these tones work because they are for a specific industry with an audience who is expecting something. But try to look into it and analyze if what competitors are doing is the smart choice or something that could be disrupted. Next up, I do the same thing on social media. I focus on the social media platforms that my client has decided to use, and also that seems like the best fit for the audience. In the case of Rootful, I think TikTok and YouTube might be the best platforms since we're trying to reach people who want growing tips, probably in video format, and also who want quick updates about what's actually happening in this urban garden so they can come visit and take part. Now that we know a little bit more about the competitors and we have these images and screenshots to draw from, I like to start adding them to my report as I go. So I add in the images from the different competitors and I make little notes of takeaways and things we can learn. So for example, things I think they did really well or things I think could be opportunities that we could use for our own brand. This report uses a template that I've created, so the sections are always more or less the same. After the research meeting with my client, I send them this report and that way they can always look back and see what we came up with, but it also works as the foundation for the concepts that we will design. Next up is brands that appeal to the same audience. So they're not in the same industry, but they share the same audience as the brand we're designing for. I do the exact same thing of visiting their website and social media, and I write down things that I observe. For Rootful, the audience is millennials who live in the city and want a break from their busy day-to-day lives. It can either be someone who works really long hours and want a hobby or a place to visit that is really relaxing, or it could be families with young kids, for example, that want a place for them to play and spend time together, maybe with other parents as well. So keeping this in mind, I think brands with a similar audience might be things like really kid-friendly cafes, yoga places, libraries, other places where these people would spend their time that would be more of what we call the third space. So not home or work, but a third space where people are willing to meet in their free time. Next up, we want to look at trends and design styles that are happening in this industry. And I would say that this part of the research is probably the least straightforward. There are lots of different ways to do this, and you have to spend some time trying to find different answers, digging around a little bit, following a couple different paths and see what you come up with. Think of it a bit like if you were a journalist and you were following different sources to see the whole picture in the story. So let's give it a try. On Google Scholar, I might search for trends for urban farms, for example, and see if we can find something. Okay, so here's a really interesting paper that looks at what those living in cities care about when they decide for or against supporting an urban farm. Scientific papers, they can seem a little bit intimidating, but there's a couple different things you can look out for to make sure that you find a good scientific study. The first one is the sample size. So if you have very few people or very few different organizations who took part, that means that the sample size was really small and it's harder to make any kind of deductions from it. So the more people who participated, the more data you have to actually make conclusions from. It can also be a good idea to see when it was published. So you actually have different filters in Google Scholar where you can make sure that you're finding something that is from the last couple of years and maybe not a study on urban farms from the 80s, for example, because that might not be as relevant right now. Start with the abstract and see if there's any information that might be interesting in this particular study. Right away, I can see that we mention a couple different reasons that people want to support urban farms, like having more food security, when we see stronger effects from global warming and higher food prices. And this is super interesting and something that we can point out when we suggest designs and messaging for the brand. I want to learn a bit more, so I'll go down to the results and discussion section. This is where they talk about what they found and what that means. First off, we can see that a big part of the audience is a similar age to our customers, so that's really good. And we can also see there are two factors that are key for adopting urban farms, and those are confidence and pleasantness. It might just be me, but I want to understand what those things mean because I think they can have a lot of different meanings. So I'm just going to click Command F and write confidence to read their definition because most scientific papers always define all of the different terms that they use. And then I do the same for pleasantness. It seems like confidence is how confident you feel that you can take part, both financially and from a time perspective. So when we think about how we can apply this to the brand, we might want the brand assets to show how easy it is to be involved, offering ways to get involved that are casual and not a continuous commitment, for example. For pleasantness, it's more about how nice the environment is to be around. So something we can put in our research report could be that we need to showcase the really pretty parts of the garden and how well adapted the garden is for smaller kids, for example. I add all this to my report and I make sure to add the source. So you can do this in a couple different ways. You could either link it directly in the text, or you could have a reference list at the end of the document. This is what I tend to do, and then I just add a quick reference to the author's name and the year it was published in the actual main text. And then at the end of the document, I add a reference list. I use the Harvard method, so there's different methods of citing, and a really quick way to do this is just to use a tool called Cite This For Me. Here you just add in the website link or a book ISBN or the article DOI number, for example, and then it creates both the text and full reference for you, so that is super quick. Next, I just do a basic Google search for trends in urban farming and see what different paths we can find that we could go down. I'm looking for articles or even trend reports that will tell me why people want to join an urban garden, and this is also a great place to find images for my mood boards. I can see that hydroponics are becoming much more popular for urban farms, but it's not exactly what we're after because Rootful doesn't really have hydroponic systems as part of their garden. I can see a couple farms that seem a bit more similar to Rootful, so I'll visit those websites and see what they say. Yeah, okay, so we can see that these are both very focused on community and creating this garden together. To see how this fits in with our millennial audience, we can see if we can find articles or reports that talk about the role of community for millennials. We're looking for articles that feel like they come from very credible sources, and I also like to check out a couple different ones before I form a kind of conclusion about what I think. This is why it's really important to have time to do the research and not feel like you have to quickly rush to find something, but make sure you have the time to browse and really take your time with it. I can see that online communities are important to millennials, but I can't see articles that directly talk about in-person communities. I do see that millennials are much more likely to live alone than older generations, so perhaps there's more of a need for community. And to find out, I see if I can find articles that talk about loneliness and see what they say about millennials. Okay, so millennials are reporting that they're likely to have only a few friends or no close friends, and a lot more people live by themselves. So this could be a great opportunity to show how the urban garden can be a place where you belong, and I think we need to be careful not to make it seem like you have to be a really expert gardener to partake. If you want to look for trends in search terms, a few great places to look are Pinterest Trends and Google Trends. This will show you what terms people use to find different urban gardens or home growing, and it can give us some idea of how the messaging can work. For example, we can see that urban green space has gone up with 150% in search in the last 12 months. We can also see on Pinterest Trends that cottage garden, meaning these cute gardens with lots of flowers and garden aesthetics, are both up in search a lot. This could tell us that people really care about having a space that's really cozy to spend time in and kind of reinforces this pleasantness factor that we saw from the scientific paper. So now that we've done a bit of research, we can draw 3 different conclusions, I think. First off, people want an urban garden that looks really nice and that they enjoy spending time in. 2 is that community is a great way to draw in millennials who want to feel part of something and don't want to feel lonely. And 3, it should feel really easy to get involved. You shouldn't feel like there's a monthly commitment or a weekly commitment, or like you have to be an expert to be involved. You should be able to just drop by and enjoy the garden. With this in mind, I want to collect a bunch of inspiration that I can use for my mood boards. So I look on Pinterest, Unsplash, Dribbble, Behance, and in books that I have in my library. For a typical project, I like to spend about 2 days collecting information, so this is obviously a super shortened version, but I hope that I can give you a good idea of how to approach the brand research stage. I already have an idea in mind that we would want one mood board to feel a bit more like a charity and focused on community, one that is more focused on the kind of cottage core, cozy aesthetic, and one that is perhaps a bit more like botanical and focuses on bringing in illustrations of plants, but I don't want to get more specific than that before I've had a look at some designs and see where my mind goes. When I look for images, I try to find a nice mix of different applications. So in this case, I know they will need a logo, a website, social media templates, and signage in the actual garden. So I want to find examples for all of these if I can. I also think photography is such an important part, so I want to find at least 1 or 2 images that can guide each mood board. As I find things, I just use the Milanote extension to add the images to my overall mood board, and then I'll sort and put it all together later. I want the stage to be really free and just creative, and a space for us to just look for inspiration without feeling like you have to be creating already. Okay, great, so now we have lots of different inspiration images that we can use. Now I want to go into Milanote and divide them up to the 3 separate mood boards, so I can make sure that I have enough images to work with once we start designing. You could definitely do just one mood board, but I find that it's quite nice to have 3 different mood boards, or at least more than one, so that you can explore some different directions at this super early stage when the stakes are a lot lower. So I like to have either a safe, a medium, and maybe a slightly more adventurous mood board, or 3 different directions that I think could all be interesting but that are super different, so that we can look together with our client and see, actually, surprisingly, this direction works really well, let's explore that. So this stage is supposed to be really playful, and we really want to be exploring different options. You could definitely make the mood board straight in Milanote, but I like to use the pen tool and add text and other details to make the mood boards feel a little bit more like the images are all from the same brand. So I personally like to make them in Illustrator. I make the mood boards the same size as my Keynote pages because I'll put all of my key research findings and the mood boards all into one presentation that I can share with my client during the meeting. I usually try to start with the colors for each mood board, and this way there's a clear kind of visual direction and I can see how they differ from each other. I also want to make sure that the typography has clear direction, so if I really like one of the images but the typography is really different from the other ones in the same mood board, I might block out that area and add text myself. The goal is for each mood board to have a really distinct direction, so we want to make sure that everything matches and feels like it could fit into the same brand. Another good idea at the mood board stage can be to look into stock illustrations or graphics that you can use, because this means that you don't need to spend all this time making something just for the mood board, but you can still get that feeling that you're after. So now I think we're at a point where I'm gonna actually say that I'm done with these mood boards. I feel like you can always keep going and find new things you want to tweak, but I'm gonna be happy with this. So for the first one, we've gone for a much more modern vibe, and the idea here is to make it feel like a place for young people to come, people who want it to be kind of like inspired by museums and cool cafes. So I wanted to have that direction in there in case that's something my client wants to pursue. The second one is a lot more around botanicals, a much softer vibe where we have illustrations and it feels like layering and almost a little bit like kind of scrapbooking, where it feels like the garden is more natural and grows a little bit at its own pace. And so here we really want to create this calm feeling of a place that you can come to when you need a bit of time. For the third one, I wanted to be a bit more of this cottagecore feeling, and here I wanted it to be lots of flowers, colors, like you have fun picnics and lots of really fun events where you can bring your kids, and there's always a lot of energy and movement. I've used these more playful illustrations here and this little dotted line to kind of create more of a DIY feel to make it feel a little bit less intimidating. Once I feel comfortable with my 3 mood boards, I add them into my keynote. Here, I also add the key takeaways from my research. The client will get the full research report after the meeting, but I just want to discuss a few key takeaways that we can incorporate into the brand. So the presentation could look something like this. We cover what the competitors look like, opportunities for their own brand, visual trends, trends and psychology for their audience, and lastly, the mood boards. I also like to show the how might we questions that we came up with in the discovery and make suggestions for how we can solve them. For example, if one of the how might we questions for Rootful was, how might we create a brand that encourages new people to visit the garden? My response could be to focus on how easy it is to join in and using really aesthetic images to show how lovely the garden is. How much information you put really is down to the scope of the project. If, let's say, you're creating a website and social media templates, then you might want to include examples from competitors or from their own current brand where you point out opportunities, for example. During the meeting with my client, I take them through each slide of the presentation one by one and discuss what we found. I make a note of any preferences that they have and any other findings that maybe they have to add that we can then put into the research report or look into further. When I present the mood boards to my client, I make sure that they understand that although these are curated directions specifically made for them, we have not designed anything uniquely. This is all a collection of things that already exist in the market. And this is just for us to make sure that we're understanding the visual direction that they are interested in taking. Because although these are all curated, we still want to make sure they feel really excited about their own brand. So personal taste and preference does come in a little bit. They can like one of the mood boards really strongly, or they can like different bits and pieces from them so that we can create a really dynamic concept that will take into consideration the different things that they're interested in. A really key thing here is to always ask why. So if your client, for example, really likes a logo, you can say, really good, perfect, that's helpful to know. Why do you like that logo? Is it the color? Is it the typography? Is it the lockup? Is it like that it feels really playful or really dynamic? Try to get to the bottom of why, because if you end up with just a collection of things that they like, but you're not quite sure why, it's really, really difficult to use that as a guide when you're creating your own concepts. We also want to let them know that dislikes are just as helpful as likes. So we don't want them to tiptoe around anything just to make sure they're not hurting our feelings, because we want to know everything, all what they like and all what they don't like. After the meeting, I add in any last information to the research report and I export the keynote to a PDF. And then I add both of these documents to the client portal. I hope this was helpful. In the next episode, we're going to actually create the brand concepts for Rootful, which feels super exciting. So if you want to join in, make sure that you're subscribed and you hit the notification bell so you can see when that video comes out. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck with your projects and see you next time.